Stone Temple Pilots were one of the most popular rock bands of the 90s and early 2000s, but they weren't always beloved by critics and were often ridiculed for having overnight success, as well as being derivative of the so-called grunge bands of Seattle and turning down offers from legendary rock acts. In today's video, let's take a look at Stone Temple Pilots' debut album, Core, a record that went on to become their most commercially successful release and gave us some of their best-known songs. If there's one theme about vocalist Scott Weiland's childhood, it's sadness. Born in San Jose, California, the frontman was born Scott Richard Klein. His parents divorced when he was just 2. He lived with his mother, who was a real estate agent, and she remarried, and Scott took his stepfather's surname. His family soon relocated to just outside of Cleveland. A young Scott still headed back to California to spend summers with his dad, who introduced him to country music and taught him how to yodel. Scott told Details magazine, "It was an enduring pain. I would spend my summers with my dad, and as soon as I got feeling love and closeness, I would have to leave." His father had another son, Craig, Scott's stepbrother, who he played with. But sadly, at the age of 11, he was hit by a car while riding his bicycle and died. Scott's visits to California became less frequent after that. Scott also suffered trauma as a child at the hands of an older male. He soon found an escape through music, taking a liking to groups like the Beatles, Cheap Trick, the Beach Boys, Sweet, and Kiss. He was even a member of the Kiss Army. It was when he was 14, Weiland relocated to California, residing in Huntington Beach. Weiland recalled in various interviews how Huntington Beach was fairly conservative and very jock-oriented. Even though Weiland wrestled and played football, he still felt like an outsider and soon gravitated more towards musicians and the punk scene, taking a liking to groups like Sex Pistols and Black Flag. He was pretty apathetic and lonely as a kid, and to escape his feelings, he soon turned to pot and harder drugs. By the age of 16, he was pulled out of class on a stretcher as his parents had him committed to a mental institution for 3 months. Once he did return to school, Scott was seen as damaged goods by the other kids. The only person in his school who really stuck up for him was a friend named Corey Hickok, who also played guitar. Scott also remarked having an imaginary friend too, who he blamed everything on. Meanwhile, across the country in Point Pleasant, New Jersey, the DeLeo brothers grew up on bands like Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, and Cheap Trick, and they even played in a cover band called Tyrus. Guitarist Dean recalled that despite being from New Jersey, they weren't fans of Bruce Springsteen or Bon Jovi. Initially, the DeLeo brothers hadn't really given a lot of consideration to becoming professional musicians. Both Robert and Dean ended up moving out west to California, but at a different time. Robert headed out to LA in 1984 following high school. But Robert wasn't entirely sure of what he wanted to do with his life. He had contemplated going to art school maybe, or hanging out on the beach all day. With only $1,200 in his pocket, his first few days in California were pretty rough. He slept in his '67 Buick. At the age of 21, though, Robert received an inheritance of $15,000 from his father, who died when he was only a child. He soon got an apartment in Long Beach, built an in-home studio. A typical day for Robert was to stay in his pajamas all day, hang around the apartment, and just record on his 8-track recorder. This time period in his life helped him hone both his writing and recording. It was in '85 he met Scott Weiland at a Black Flag show. It's been said that both men realized they were dating the same woman after talking to each other at the gig. But rather than go all Ross and Joey about it, they dumped the girl and decided to make music together using Robert's studio. There was one interview that Scott gave to a German publication where he claimed Robert and himself didn't date the same girl at the same time, but rather at different times. Other publications claim the opposite. Robert and Scott seemed like complete opposites to one another. Robert was a pretty quiet guy. He was introverted, shy, while Scott was more outgoing. In fact, later on in their career, Robert was frequently mistaken for being STP's manager. By the time Scott met Robert, Scott was in a band called Soy Distant with his friend and guitarist Corey Hickok. The group bore some resemblance to Duran Duran and Ultravox. After meeting Robert, the trio formed a new group called Swing, and they added drummer Eric Kretz. Kretz was spotted by Robert and Scott at a gig, and they were impressed with the power that he played with, and he was so loud he drowned out the rest of the band. Kretz told Louder Sound, We were into the more funky James Brown meets rock type of thing. The stuff Robert and I were really trying to do was in that Led Zeppelin, James Brown, Grand Funk Railroad vein, with funky backbeats underneath the rock music. The songs were a lot more silly. Scott's friend Corey seemed like the odd man out in the band, and the rest of the members weren't really happy with the direction of the group. Robert suggested they bring in his brother Dean. Dean, during this time, was a wandering soul like his brother Robert. Dean had spent some time in Europe skiing in the Alps, and he soon headed west to California after his brother-in-law offered him a job in San Diego to manage a wholesale construction company. Dean did make the trip out to LA and recorded a few demos with his brother's band, including the songs Piece of Pie, Cracker Man, and Where the River Goes. Dean liked the demos so much that he decided to join the group in 1989, but he still opted to live in San Diego, telling the interviewer, "I was a master at holding the phone between my knees and playing a guitar into it." Dean, wanting a fresh start, advised the group to come up with a new name. They came up with the moniker Mighty Joe Young, taking its name from a mid-century film. With the addition of Dean, the group's sound shifted to be more hard rock, and gone were those silly lyrics that Scott was coming up with. In fact, Scott soon developed a type of tortured artist persona, with Kretz telling louder sound. I saw him delving a lot more into the arts, poetry, strange novels, watching really avant-garde movies. You gotta develop that tortured artist intellect, and you have to be able to express it in your own form, and that's what he did. Like any struggling musicians, the members soon got day jobs. Scott at one point worked for a local newspaper as a paste-up guy, literally cutting stories and photos along with ads and creating the layouts for the next day's issue. And at one point, he worked as a chauffeur for a modeling agency on the Sunset Strip. That's where he met his future wife, model Mary Forsberg. You might remember her from the Fall to Pieces video Velvet Revolver did. Working across the street from Scott at a guitar shop was Robert. It was here that he came face to face with musicians who were dominating the glam metal scene, telling louder sound. Working at that guitar shop and seeing some of these hairband guys come in was an education. Every one of those could play really great, but it was a blueprint on how not to treat people. Mighty Joe Young played their first gig in August of 1990 at the Whiskey A Go-Go, opening for Henry Rollins. They soon started gigging at other clubs around the city, including the Coconut Teaser and Club Lingerie. But the band soon ran into trouble as some venues required bands to pay to play. Add to that the members' distaste for the mood in the LA music scene, and they soon started gigging in San Diego. Robert remarked to an interviewer that it was so much easier to land gigs in San Diego, as club owners would book the group without really knowing anything about them, and the music scene was of course much smaller. Weiland told Rip Magazine, an hour and a half away is a whole nother city with a whole different scene that hasn't been pillaged by the Hollywood music industry. It's a fresh new thing. We'd go play a show and there'd be people there to see us play, not because we'd hung out on Melrose and passed out flyers, but just because there's this band. They're supposed to be really good. Let's go see them. It was in San Diego that Mighty Joe Young soon developed a sizable following. The news of their success quickly traveled back to Los Angeles, and it was a booking agent named Don Muller from Triad Artists who saw the group play at the LA dive venue Club with No Name. He tipped off Atlantic Records A&R man Tom Carolyn, and Carolyn saw the band perform at the Hollywood Club Shamrocks. Mighty Joe Young was soon offered a major recording contract. However, the group was a little scared of signing with a major label, with Robert telling Rolling Stone, "God, we were scared. I think any band that's getting looked at by a label is worried. We were all concerned about getting on a major label and getting lost in the sauce. I mean, there's two kinds of contracts. There's one with Vaseline and there's one with coffee grounds. The group's nervousness was soon put to rest when they met with Carolyn, who had a background in both alternative and college radio. On top of that, making the decision to sign with Atlantic was made easier when they met with Danny Goldberg, who at the time was not only managing Beastie Boys, Nirvana, and Sonic Youth, he had just joined Atlantic as their senior vice president. Goldberg admitted that when he first saw Mighty Joe Young, he thought Scott Weiland was more movie star than rock star. But his perception quickly changed when he talked to the frontman and understood his vision for the band. Atlantic was enamored with the group and surrendered full creative control to Mighty Joe Young, something which was not very common at the time. They signed with Atlantic Records on March 31st, 1992. So the next day, on April Fool's Day, the members went to their jobs and told their bosses they quit. Their employers thought it was a joke that they landed a recording contract, but of course, that wasn't the case. In the spring of '92, Mighty Joe Young relocated to the San Fernando Valley with producer Brendan O'Brien, who had already worked with the Black Crowes, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and Temple of the Dog, to name a few. Drummer Eric Kretz recalled the energy the band brought to these sessions, telling Songfacts, "There was enthusiasm and excitement, and everyone was in the room and participating creatively, artistically. It's the most fun time to be in a band when everyone has the same ideas and everyone has the same goals." Core ended up being recorded in just 3 weeks. The songs on Core were autobiographical. Dean told the El Paso Herald, "We didn't try to sound like anything. The album is very autobiographical. It's just the anxieties, fears, and doubts each of us has on a day-to-day basis." As the group submitted their album to their label, they ran into a hiccup. They soon discovered that an old Chicago blues musician already had the name Mighty Joe Young. The musician had been putting out albums since the 70s on a local indie label. He went on hiatus and then decided to come back. So the quartet had to come up with a new name. It would be a car lubricant called STP oil treatment that inspired Mighty Joe Young's new name. Scott had had a fascination with it since he was a kid. He suggested the band come up with a new name using the letters STP. One early name they had was Shirley Temple's Private. They had a more lewd term for the letter P than what I'm actually saying, but I'll leave it to your imagination. They eventually went with Stone Temple Pilots, with Dean admitting that the name means nothing. Released in September of '92 during the peak of grunge, the album's first single, Sex Type Thing, was a massive hit on MTV, first landing on the network's Buzzbin program, which featured up-and-coming bands and songs. It soon graduated to regular rotation and was getting play on MTV alongside Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, and Nirvana. Sex Type Thing, while embraced by MTV, also got a good amount of attention on alternative radio, peaking at number 23 on the charts, but modern rock radio didn't really embrace it. Dean admitted that the riff for Sex Type Thing was inspired by Led Zeppelin's song In the Light. The single, though, garnered a ton of controversy. While the band were adamant in the press that they were pro-women, the media took a look at the lyrics and made up their own minds. If you read any press interview with STP during the promotion for Core, Sex Type Thing's meaning comes up again and again. For Scott, the ironies seem to be lost on everyone. Here's the frontman explaining to MTV what the lyrics are about.
The lyrics to the song are actually written about the sexual persecution of women, which is something that we feel very important about. But rather than just come out and make some kind of typical political statement about this is what I believe or that's what I believe, I just put myself into the mindset of the total macho American male attitude about women and their sexuality.
So you're speaking as a person that is unlike yourself. You're not, when you're singing that song, you're not speaking of your own personal experiences, you're speaking about another character.
Yeah, exactly.
In a separate interview, Weiland told Rolling Stone that since the cop killer controversy involving Ice-T was over, the press needed something else to latch onto. By the way, guys, I've done a very thorough video on the cop killer controversy. If you're interested in that, the link is down below. Kretz told the Albuquerque Journal about the song, stating, "In the beginning, Sex Type Thing was misconstrued. After we did a few interviews and talked about it on radio, people started getting it. It happens a lot with first narrative. It's open to interpretation. As a result of the controversy and the band doing follow-up interviews explaining what the song was about, they did receive support from many feminist organizations and did several concerts for pro-choice activists Rock for Choice. But it was the album's second single, Plush, that catapulted STP into the stratosphere." Plush proved to be a crossover hit, topping the mainstream rock tracks chart, and also appeared on the pop charts, peaking at number 18. Plush was written by Robert in 1989 with him telling Rolling Stone, when I played it for Scott, he didn't like it. He said, it sounds too much like Boston. It's kind of funny considering the song was often compared to sounding like a Pearl Jam track. In fact, Plush was a lot of people's first introduction to SDP, so of course the first thing they thought of was Pearl Jam. Even at live shows, Scott jokingly introduced the song to audiences as being a song that Pearl Jam wrote for them. Dean, meanwhile, jokingly told the Reno Gazette-Journal, "We studied 10 very carefully before we went into the studio." He added, "I saw one thing that really bothered me. Some guitar magazine transposed Plush and completely bagged us." Yes, this is a very typical Stone Gossard arrangement they wrote. It was completely unbelievable. Plush's popularity only increased when the band performed an acoustic version for MTV's program Headbangers Ball.
And I feel when the dogs begin to smell her.
That performance almost never happened, though, because of a feud between MTV and SDP. I'll talk a little later about that. Plush's lyrics were loosely inspired by a story the members had read about a young woman from San Diego who went missing and was later discovered to have been murdered. During the band's performance on VH1 Storytellers, Scott remarked the song's lyrics deal with a lost, obsessive relationship. There was even one article written by a Reno Gazette-Journal author who tried repeatedly to get in touch with Scott Weiland to find out the true meaning of the song, to no avail. By May of '93, Core reached the top 10 in America, but the band wasn't done just yet. The album's final single, the melancholy tune Creep, peaked at number 2 on the rock charts, and remember watching the movie Black Hawk Down when Grimes finds out he's about to head out on the now infamous October 3rd raid, and you can hear it playing in the background.
I made coffee through Desert Storm. I made coffee through Panama while everyone else got to fight, got to be a ranger.
There were even a few songs, including Dead and Bloated and Wicked Garden, which were issued as promotional singles from the album. Dead and Bloated became a fan favorite and is still played on radio today, but it never charted. Wicked Garden, meanwhile, peaked at number 11 on the mainstream rock tracks chart and number 21 on the alternative airplay chart. In the case of Dead and Bloated, Scott came up with the riff himself, but he never played it on guitar. He vocalized how he thought it should sound to his bandmates. At the end of the day, Core was a massive album selling over 8 million copies in the States. While the public loved the band, some critics didn't. Nothing was more evident of this than when in 1994, Rolling Stone's editorial staff called SDP one of the worst bands of the year. While funny enough, in the same issue, readers voted them one of the best new bands. The press loved to compare SDP to Seattle bands like Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. The media frequently called SDP grunge, something the band members detested. I even came across one article from 1993 where the band was tagged as being heavy metal, and even their own record label called them alternative metal. Dean told Rocker's Edge, "We keep hearing how we're a metal band or how we're a grunge band," with Kretz adding, "That just doesn't really work for us. We're from San Diego, not Seattle, so we really can't be part of the grunge thing. And what is heavy metal? If your definition is music that's played with power and purpose, then maybe we fit. I don't think that's everyone's definition." Unlike the groups from Seattle, the members of SDP embraced fame and talked about how grateful they were for everything that had happened so far in their careers. Scott Weiland also praised Pearl Jam frontman Eddie Vedder, telling Rolling Stone in 1993, "I have a lot of respect for Eddie Vedder and the ideals and things he stands for. As an artist, he's very valid, but I never thought if you put us next to each other, we looked like Siamese twins or anything." But Vedder, for his part, only added fuel to the fire, telling Rolling Stone the same year, "Beth and I were part of the scene in San Diego. We knew what was going on, which was not a lot. Those guys referring to SDP are supposedly from there. I've never heard of them." Later on, Vedder told the same magazine, "People stop me in the streets to tell me about Stone Temple Pilots. I don't even know who they are." Another criticism that was leveled against SDP was that they hadn't paid their dues. They were an overnight success. In reality, Scott and the DeLeo brothers had been playing in bands since the age of 15. SDP also had a contentious relationship with some of the bigger rock magazines like Rolling Stone and Spin, who the members claim often misquoted them. Dean told Metal Hammer Germany in 1993, "Rolling Stone magazine kissed my ass. It wasn't just critics who slammed the band, even some of the readers of Spin hated the band too. Following Spin's cover story of STP, the band was met with some harsh comments from its readers. One reader responded, "If polka became popular, then STP would pick up accordions." Another reader referred to them as Kingdom Come of alternative. A third reader claimed to have gone to school with Scott, where he supposedly acted like a punk-hating, beer-drinking, girl-chasing Duran Duran fan. Even some bands from San Diego resented STP, with some press outlets claiming the band was, and I quote, "the center of the city's music scene." These local bands accused STP of being a carbon copy of Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains. But on the bright side, because of the attention San Diego was getting because of STP, labels started scouring the city for acts to sign. The band's tour to support Core was the first major tour of their career. Some shows went really well while others didn't. That could be widely attributed to the fact that the band's songs hadn't gotten the exposure they'd get over the coming months in all markets across North America. At one show in Buffalo, they played to about 6 people, and 7 if you include the bartender, while the next night in Toronto, Canada, they played to a sold-out audience. The tour also saw STP open for metal group Megadeth, and the crowds initially weren't very receptive. Megadeth leader Dave Mustaine was blown away by Core, as he told Loudwire here.
It's really peculiar the way things went down with me and Scott, because I was in Finland doing a radar record thing for a magazine one time, and they'd given us the Core record to review. And I was listening to it and I thought, either this is a really bad joke or these guys are going to be massive, because they've got a sound that's very similar to a lot of the great bands that are in the alternative scene right now, but I don't know if it's a parody or if it's the real deal. And the more I listened to it, the more I really grew to respect his vocals, and I thought that Robert, his playing was really great too. So they were called Mighty Joe Young at the time, and I talked to our manager and I said, "I want to take these guys out." And the manager said, "Well, you know, people just aren't digging on them." And I was like, "I don't care, I want to take them out." So in 1992 on the Countdown to Extinction tour, we took Stone Temple Pilots out. And
early in that tour, Megadeth's audiences for STP were small, and they frequently gave the band the finger or turned their backs on them. Dean told the Calgary Herald, "I'm sorry to say this, but the Megadeth crowd is very Wayne and Garth pimple-faced. You know, still wearing Iron Maiden shirts. It seems hard for them to open up to somebody like us." It was Mustaine who helped the band hone their live shows, giving them advice on which order to play songs, and even showed up on stage several times during STP's set to scold the audience. One of the best pieces of advice that Mustaine gave STP was to open their set with Cracker Man, a song that sees Weiland use a bullhorn. It was while the band was on the road with Megadeth that Plush started getting significant airplay on both radio and MTV. It was at one point the audiences seemed to change their attitude towards the band, and soon enough the audiences for the opening set swelled. As the tour concluded though, Mustaine gave Scott some advice, and that was to stay away from heroin. But sadly, it fell on deaf ears. STP soon got an offer to open for Aerosmith on their mega-sized Get a Grip tour, but to many people's surprise, they turned down the offer. While the members were themselves Aerosmith fans, they wanted to achieve success on their own terms. They also didn't want to give the press more ammo, who could accuse them of riding people's coattails. There were also some accusations in the press that STP had an issue with Aerosmith, and that's why they turned them down. In most of the interviews that Stone Temple Pilots gave, they claimed that they wanted to play more intimate venues and keep ticket prices low for the fans of the group. Instead, the band opted to tour as part of the Barbecue Mitzvah Tour, a smaller-sized knockoff of Lollapalooza that saw them tour alongside Butthole Surfers and Flaming Lips. The future of Stone Temple Pilots changed on that tour in June of '93. There was a stopover in New York City, and for that night's set, STP decided to dress up as Kiss. Before hitting the stage, Scott used heroin for the first time, and it was a decision that would haunt the band for the next 2 decades. In 1998, Scott appeared on The Howard Stern Show and cited Gibby Haynes of Butthole Surfers as introducing the drug to him. Drummer Eric Kretz told Louder Sound, "Before that, we were all heavy drinkers. I'd watch him drink until he passed out. He didn't do it all the time, but it happened. But that tour changed things. He learned some bad habits, and unfortunately, they stayed with him." There was also some bad blood between Haynes and Weiland over remarks that Butthole Surfers frontman made about STP to Ricky Rackman. It resulted in STP's camp being upset at MTV and refusing to do the program Headbangers Ball. Here's a snippet of what happened.
One time the Butthole Surfers were on the Headbangers Ball and we were introducing Stone Temple Pilots video, And Gibby says,
wow, Stone Temple Pilots. Who does that band remind you of?
who doesn't it remind you of? Oh, they were not happy with that. And Weiland just caused a huge stink.
I guess Stone Temple Pilots were really sensitive to a lot of criticism at that time.
Weiland wouldn't do our show, wouldn't do a whole bunch of other stuff.
We were supposed to do a 4th of July shoot with them in LA, and that got squashed.
The big stuff that he was supposed to do for MTV, he canceled because of what I said. My producer called me, and Nancy's like, look, everybody's pissed off at you. You know, you've got to apologize to Weiland for saying that. So I ended up calling up Dean from Stone Temple Pilots and talking to him about it, and they put me in touch with Weiland.
He called and apologized, and I'm sure that was, you know, really awkward for him.
And I basically kissed his ass.
And they came back.
And for the record, I think the new Stone Temple Pilots doesn't sound like anybody, and it's good.
By the summer of '93, Stone Temple Pilots were one of the hottest bands in America, as Core was sitting at number 3 on the charts. But the members' interpersonal relationship reached its low point. Despite the band's internal turmoil, they still managed to begin work on the music that found its way onto their long-awaited follow-up, 1994's Purple, which proved to be a massive hit. It produced a slew of big-time songs like Big Empty, Vaseline, and Interstate Love Song. That brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and as always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and we'll see you again, Rock and Roll Your Stories. Take care.